Hey Debbie crew, it's me John with a video on a little bit of a different track here today. Since this is a gaming channel and we do want to talk about more than just tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, today I'm going to go to something that's near and dear to my heart and spend a little bit of time talking about some Magic the Gathering philosophy for a moment. For those of you who are here more for the D&D content and my analysis on that, stay tuned. Not only is there more content coming, I actually think you'll find today interesting as well. It will help us all get a little bit better at our game theories, about learning the economics of different games and how they interact together, but also it's just fun to explore some different games that you didn't know as to whether you enjoyed them or not. A lot of these hobbies have some overlap, and a lot of them don't. For those who are here new to check out the channel for the first time, thank you for coming by. If you could do me the greatest favor of all, give me a subscription, give me a like on the video, leave some comments as to what you like, what you'd like to see improved upon. It helps me know what direction everyone would want to go and gives me exactly the tools that I need to make sure that the content is what you guys would like to have delivered. For returning viewers, here we are again. Let's sit down and have a little bit of a chat. So for this, I'm going to pop the comment up on the screen, but in trolling through Twitter and trolling through Reddit, as I occasionally do, I came upon a question put out by the Twitter user Golgari Guy. Seems like a great person with a lot of questions, so by all means, check out their content if it's something that you'd like to follow. I'm going to brazenly steal this content to make my own content about my analysis on it here as well, so heads out for that. If Golgari Guy, if you end up seeing this video at some point, I took your content, but I am giving you credit here for it. I think you posed a really good question about 2 days ago now, I think, from when I'm filming this. The question was an example Magic card. So essentially they've designed a Magic the Gathering card with the functionality of one as a thought experiment. Essentially the question is, would you play this card in your commander deck? I believe they phrased it in the question as EDH. For anyone who's not familiar with the difference, EDH is what Commander is today. The old term for it was Elder Dragon Highlander, or EDH. Today it's known as Commander, as the game was invented by people outside of Wizards of the Coast as a variant of Magic the Gathering. 12 years ago now, something like that. And at some point, I think more long ago than that even, but around 12 years ago, Wizards of the Coast was so enamored with that and realized how many people were playing it that they changed the name of it to Commander, and now it's actually an official format that people play for the card game. So it's important to note that this is for Commander so that we can get the math of this right, because it's a little bit of a math question. Anyway, here's the card Golgari Guy designed. First, we know the cost of the card, and it costs a total of 5 mana. We can see that here by knowing that it's 4 and 1 black. For those who are familiar with Magic the Gathering, I hope you'll indulge me a little bit here in this video as I explain the logic and the economics of how this game works in brief for the people who are not familiar with the game, so that they can think of the question and how that might apply to their own lives and their own games as well. Because this is the type of question that most people ask in most resource-based games. So for those not in the know, Magic the Gathering is a resource-based game. Essentially, you're trying to collect resources through time constraints and churn constraints that you have to get those resources, and the prime one that you use within the game of Magic the Gathering is mana. Essentially, you're channeling energy that you get from different lands and other sources that you can put down on the table, or on the battlefield as we call it, that allow you to cast the spells or the other cards in your hand. All of those have a cost, and sometimes you can have other ways to play cards, but for the most part, you end up using your lands, which give you 1 unit of that energy per turn, and then the next turn you get those lands again to be able to use, and you can play another land. So you will start your first turn by probably being able to cast a spell that costs 1, your next turn something up to 2, or maybe 2 spells that cost 1 apiece, and it moves mostly linearly like that. So it's a resource-based game, and that's the chief resource. And in this particular card, the resource that's used, the mana that would be used to cast this spell and get the effect that the card says, would cost 5. That's important to note that it's in black, because Magic the Gathering is based on 5 different colors that all have different talents, or personalities, or abilities. Most of the colors can do all the same things, but usually at an increased cost. And an important note here is that one of those colors is black. Black is a color that's very good at removing your opponent's creatures, the different living things that they summon as part of the game that attack and are often a key strategy to winning. So being able to kill creatures is typically an important part of the game. In this case, black is known as the color that is the best at removing individual creatures. If you're someone who's playing the black color in Magic the Gathering, you can typically look across the field at any number of your opponents who are playing the game with you, and you can say, if you have a creature, I'm probably one of the best ones that's geared to remove it. What that usually means is it's the color that has the cheapest casting cost to be able to remove creatures. And so for those who are not familiar with the game, 5 mana to remove a creature in black is very expensive. 5 mana is probably 2 mana more expensive than you would typically see this spell used within black. If it was in another color, it might be a fair question, but for black, it's pretty expensive. It says that you exile the creature. So for, again, anyone not familiar with how the game works, when you exile the target creature, it's worse than killing it. Imagine instead of just killing it and putting it somewhere where a evil sorcerer could maybe bring it back to life or something like that. Exiling means you just remove it from the game. Imagine instead of killing something, you vaporize it and every atom is split. There's nothing to recover. There are always exceptions. I'm aware of that for any Magic the Gathering player out there who's saying, no, there's ways you can bring a card back from exile. I know, but let's keep it simple for everyone for now so we can get to the fun of the real math question that's here. So it's important to note this card's in black. Black typically can kill a creature for 3 mana, and this card's asking you to pay 5. So it's not a good deal. However, it is a better card than that because of the next line that's proposed, which is you can play this card for free. Its casting cost would be 0. All you need to do is take 10 cards from your library, the pool of cards that you would get to draw that you would then be able to cast once you've drawn them into your hand, that you'd be able to play on the battlefield or interact with everyone else's spells. You're going to take 10 of those cards, and you're going to remove them in exile. So to exile one of your opponent's cards that's on the battlefield, you're going to exile 10 of your own cards from the pool of cards that you would have available to you. With me so far? Excellent. So, in exiling those 10 cards, and it's important to note that when you're playing the Commander format, you would have 99 cards in your deck to start with. It's actually a 100-card format, so I'm going to pretend it's 100 cards just for the easier math of it. You're going to take 10% of your deck, and you're going to remove it from the game. And in exchange, instead of paying 5 mana to have the effect of this spell, you get to play it for 0 mana. It's just free. You get to have it in your hand and play it. The question posed by Golgari Guy is this a good card? Now, they also had an addendum which says, assume you're not using any exile strategies. Remember earlier in this video I'd mentioned, for anyone in the know for Magic the Gathering would say, there are sometimes some benefits to having exile strategies. You might have some benefits where you're getting rid of the cards from your library. And Golgari Guy is saying, okay, we know that sometimes there are certain strategies that win in different ways in Magic the Gathering, and you can churn a weakness into a strength. Let's say we're not doing that. Let's say that losing those 10 cards from your library is just a cost. There's no benefit to the strategy that you're playing. You're just losing here. You're losing 10 cards from your library in exchange for the effect of killing one singular creature of your choice. Would you play that card? And the interesting part is, while the answer from most people was yes, there was a huge debate about whether this card is good, or whether it's terrible, or whether it's so good it's practically an automatic include if you're playing in the right colors. And I like when everyone's opinions on something are very divergent like that. I think that leads to interesting thought experiments about how some people would be thinking about the game that they love and they play. To not spoil the answer just yet, because I want to be clear, there is an obvious answer here, I'm going to let you guys think about that as a community for a second. And then if you need more time to think about it, I'll let you know when to pause the video so you can have some time to mull that over. So again, here are the details. Card costs 5 mana in black to exile one creature of your choice, or you can play the card for free, so no mana cost, and all you have to do is exile 10 cards from your library. Is that a good card to play, or is that too expensive to play? And meaning it would still do that effect, but you wouldn't choose that because there are better cards available for you to choose from. That's the question. Tick tock, tick tock. This is where you can pause if you need some more time to think about it. All right, for those who stayed around or for those who already had their answer, what's the answer? It is very obvious. It's an extremely strong card. You would want to play this every single time because it's free to play. I know the card says you're getting rid of 10 cards from your library. No, you're not. It's free to play. It's free to play. It's not a trick. You are going to take 10 cards from your library and you're going to move them from your library, your pool of cards available to you, and you're going to move it into exile. And you are therefore losing 10 cards. And my answer to you is, no, you're not. You have lost nothing. It's just a free effect. Why is that? And if your answer is different than that, let me help explain the limitations on the thinking, because this is a common economics question. The problem isn't the math. If you realized there's a cost to taking 10 cards and putting them from your library into exile, I would say, no, you didn't realize that's not a cost because you didn't ask the question in a practical way. If you needed more information, you might be an economist if you asked me a question like, I'm not familiar with Magic the Gathering, but you said that you play with 100 cards. Do I need all 100 cards? And if you asked that question, I would say, good job. Good job. You're thinking about this exactly the right way. Because the answer is no. It's extremely rare that you would play a normal commander game of Magic the Gathering and use all the cards in your library. They're all, in theory, available to you, and there are cards that let you go through your library and look for a specific one that you want. There are cards that let you draw extra cards. It's important to know that in Magic the Gathering, by default, you would draw 1 card per turn. It's another resource limitation that makes the game fun and introduces an element of chance. You don't know what cards are in place. You don't know what order they're in your library, unless you've had a card go into your library and look for it or something like that. So generally, you're taking 10 random cards that you don't know what they are, and you're removing them from your library, so you definitely do not have a chance to play those cards anymore. You didn't have a chance in the first place to play all 100 cards. Let's go through the math here a little bit just to put this in a different frame, because I'm positive if we frame the question the right way, anyone who at first thought this was a bad trade would see that this is a trade you would take every single time. This effect is so powerful on the card, I doubt they would ever print a card this powerful. It's just too good. It would eventually be something that everyone would run. At least that's what I thought when the question was asked, but looking through the poll results, it's only about 2/3 of people that realize that it's good. And out of that, I imagine most of those people only realized it was good after they read through some of the comments. Maybe they had a professional player comment on it, or someone else, they read the comment, they realized that they were thinking about it the wrong way, and they sheepishly made sure that they answered the poll with the correct answer. In my experience in asking these types of questions, a lot of people, probably about half of Magic the Gathering players, would have said that this card is not good, and they would say they're not going to run it, because they would never pay 10 cards, really 11 cards, including the card that you're using itself, to get rid of one of their opponent's cards. In Magic the Gathering, we would call that a 10 for 1, or an 11 for 1, and they would say, why on earth would I trade 10 of my cards for one of my opponent's cards? Over time, that's just a terrible trade. Even if the card I get rid of on their side is very good, and all 10 that I happen to randomly get rid of on my side are not useful, it's still a really bad trade. You're thinking about it wrong if that's your thought process. Even though the numbers you used are all correct. The arithmetic that you used is correct, but from a mathematical principle, you've asked a question that doesn't make sense, or you've solved a problem with the wrong inputs for the real world and how it would work in a practical application. Here's what I mean by that. It's hard to know how long an average Commander game goes, but I'm going to post an article that's a couple of years old. I imagine this is relatively similar today, where some people had attempted to do an experiment to determine how long average Commander games go. So what they used is average games that were played online with 4 players. That most Commander games are typically with 4 players. There's exceptions, but 4 players is the most common way that happens. And they analyzed 100 games with the public game data that's available. So they just, at random, picked these games. They tried to make sure that it's average players, so not the upper end of professional players and not new people who have just started playing and are getting used to the rules. They tried to pick average players playing decks at about an average level of difficulty. Sometimes you can have decks that are much better than other decks, and they tried to make sure that we're all playing decks in that average range. The reason that they did this was to find out what kind of average data does an average Commander player run into. And part of what they determined is the average game lasts about 10 turns. It's a little bit more than 10 turns. Now, that certainly means you're going to have some games that last 20 turns, and it certainly means you're going to have some games that last 3 turns. Anyone who's played enough Commander, back me up on this. That's how your Commander games go too. Sometimes someone gets to go off on turn 1, and that's the game. You might survive another couple turns, but they've really run by the time the game started. And other times you have a grindy matchup that lasts for 20 or more turns. It lasts for 2 hours, and everyone realizes how miserable that was because usually you want a game to last somewhere around 10 to 15 turns. 10 seems to be about the average, so let's say 10 turns. Let's also assume that you start with the normal hand size. There are ways that you might start with a smaller one, but for now, we're going to stick with you start with 7 cards in your hand. So when you start the game, you've got a library with 99 cards in that. Again, we're going to call it 100 just for sake of argument right now. And you're going to take 7 cards out of that. Right off the top, you're going to take the 7 cards and you're going to look at those and you're going to say, I'm keeping these 7, this is good for me. And then every turn that goes by default, you're going to draw 1 more card. In an average game, that would mean you've seen how many cards from your deck, assuming you didn't draw any more cards. That would mean you'd have 7 plus the 10 from the turns that you would have drawn, so 17 cards. For those, again, not in the know, there are lots of cards that let you draw more cards. That's part of the game of Magic the Gathering. There are cards that let you temporarily or permanently increase the number of resources that you have. So something that gives you more mana, or something that gives you more creatures, or something that gives you more cards. And card draw cards, so a card that says you get to draw more cards than that one, are pretty common. Most people play those in their Commander decks as well. And I'm going to say that in an average game, let's say an average player drew another, let's say 3 to 5 cards on top of the 10 they would have drawn through the turns. Make sense so far? So let's just say in an average game, from your deck of 100 cards, you saw about 20 of them. Now, you don't know which 20. It's mostly random from shuffling your deck, and there are things you can do to try to interact with your deck more to change which cards you're drawing. Sometimes you can go into your deck, into your library, and just pull the card that you want to play. But for now, let's say you're not really playing any of that, because most games, it's going to be drawing cards that you don't know in advance from the top of your deck. You're going to see 20 of those cards, including the ones that you drew at the start of the game, over the course of the life of an average Commander game. So what's a better way to think of that? What that means is, for all intents and purposes, in your deck of cards, out of the 100 cards that you started with, 20 of them existed, and 80 of them were in exile. 80 of those cards you never saw in the first place. They might as well not have existed in an average game of Commander. And you're saying that in order to play the card that we're talking about, that costs 5 mana but is free as long as you take 10 of those cards, all you're really doing is taking 10 of the 80 cards you never would have drawn anyways and putting them into a different form of exile. It's like they were never in your library and you just moved them to somewhere else that isn't in your library. Cards you were never going to see, you've now moved over to cards that you would never see. You did nothing. There was no cost there. You were never going to see those cards in the first place. That's the right frame for this. And if you put that frame around that question, I'm sure everyone now sees you would play that card for free because it's free. Free is always good. And in Magic the Gathering, free is always good. Free is typically too good. They try to avoid printing cards that are free. As long as we ignore the fact that under the Fire philosophy, yes, they're printing lots of cards that have free or alternate casting costs, and those inevitably break the game because people can take advantage of that. In this situation, a lot of people didn't seem capable of understanding why moving cards from your library you never would have seen in the first place is actually not a cost. Here's the philosophy behind that, or the psychology behind that, I guess I'll say. Why did most people who answered the question, or many people who answered the question, not understand that that's not a cost in the first place? The reason is you can see the cards that you moved into exile. And people have an attachment to their cards even if they didn't get a chance to play them. What someone who's moving those cards into exile is going to see is, oh no, I really needed another land. And look, I put all my land in there. 10 cards into exile and it's all land. Now I'm probably going to lose the game. Well, that's not true. It could statistically happen, of course. You could exile the cards that actually would have been the ones that you would have drawn next turn. And so the problem is you're thinking you would have drawn those cards and you would have played those cards had you not exiled them in the first place. And that's true, but it's statistically not true. And I think a lot of people have trouble wrapping their head around that difference. It is true that had you made a different choice, you would have had those cards that were on top. But it's almost like it's Schrodinger's cards. They weren't those cards in the first place. You paid them as a cost. They were never there. And 80 out of your 100 cards were never there in your library in an average game. It's just not actually a cost. They never existed in the first place. They theoretically existed. They could have existed if reality had been different, but reality wasn't different, and therefore they never existed. And as people, we don't tend to grasp that difference. There's another psychological element that's at play, which is loss. Loss always feels worse. Losing something that you had, or that you felt that you had, feels worse than gaining something, even if you can objectively say, I'm gaining a lot and losing a little. Losing something hurts people. Even if it ended up where they're better than they would have been had they not accepted that loss, it hurts people. It doesn't actually hurt them. It sort of hurts your ego, let's say. It didn't physically hurt you. You got an effect from the card. In the limitations of this game, you lost something that you never had in the first place, that you were never going to use in the first place, in exchange for something that was useful, that was something that you're going to use, that had a tangible effect on the reality of the game that you're seeing in front of you. And yet, many people are so concentrating and focused on what they've lost from the game that wasn't in the game to begin with. It was already in exile. You were never going to see those cards. It's just an interesting psychological trick that I found coming from a relatively simple question. And I really find it fascinating that games are filled with these kinds of questions. I also find it fascinating how these types of questions can apply to your own day-to-day life. So I hope for those who are not Magic the Gathering players, that you're thinking of the games that you do play within your own life, and you're thinking to yourself, are there any costs that I don't like paying in a game that are not actually costs? It's phrased as though it's a cost. It makes it feel as though I'm losing something. But are you? Are you actually losing something? If you're pretty sure you are, then yes, you would want to weigh the pros and cons of whether you're losing a resource in the game that you're playing. Extrapolate that to your own life as well. Are you living your life in such a way that you're afraid of a loss that isn't actually a loss at all? Just some food for thought on this humble gaming channel. Until then, I'll be chatting with you guys next time. And again, just to end the channel here, or to end the video here, not ending the channel, we're good on that front. If you guys could subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let me know what you think of these kinds of philosophical discussions as well on gaming theory and the business of gaming. Let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback and make sure that we're not losing something that we never had in the first place. Ciao.